Among the thousands of UFO sightings recorded worldwide in modern times, perhaps the most dramatic occurred in eastern England, at ground level in a forest at night.
We are getting an indication of a heat source. Where? Right in this position here, straight ahead. There it is again. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. See if you can get the star scope on it. There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
The voice of Colonel Charles Halt, recorded as he and his men caught sight of a UFO near their NATO airbase at Rendlesham Forest, Suffolk. Visiting the scene with an American guard who lived through it became, for me, the dramatic high point of this personal voyage of discovery, which has lasted several months. Trying to establish whether some UFOs might be alien spacecraft has in fact been my most difficult journalistic assignment ever. Evidence, mostly verbal, is everywhere, but outright proof still doesn't exist. 90% of all sightings usually have rational explanations, and no government admits that extraterrestrial beings are a reality. So whether there's life elsewhere in the universe remains one of the great unanswered questions of our time. But there are other complexities, even with a sighting like Rendlesham Forest. Jenny Randalls, author of some 30 UFO books and a top British investigator, is only too aware of them.
The incident at Rendlesham Forest in 1980 is clearly an extraordinary case, and I think one of the best attested UFO encounters in the history of the world. There is no doubt that something crashed down out of the sky, which was physically real because it left a gaping hole in the tops of the pine trees and indentations in the ground. It left radiation levels several times greater than anything that was sprinkled over Britain in the wake of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor accident. So yes, there clearly was a physically real object there. It also turned up on radar, and it was witnessed at close quarters by trained military personnel, one of whom got close enough to try to touch it. Now, the problems come when you try to interpret what that something was, because just because something turns up on radar, just because it leaves a hole in the tops of pine trees and scatters radiation over a forest and is seen by witnesses as some strange glowing object, doesn't prove that that something was an extraterrestrial visitor.
My own curiosity about this whole subject had been triggered by a close encounter with a mundane UFO book 4 years ago. From there, I trod onward slowly, keeping an ever-open mind. And when I began this investigation, it seemed sensible first to take a sounding from someone who spends his entire working life in the sky, but who's also very down-to-earth, like airline pilot Captain Graham Shepherd.
I was flying from Scotland to Heathrow. It was a bright sunny day, and we were alerted by Preston radar, and he advised us that we had opposite direction traffic, fast moving, in the airway, and it was unknown. And we looked out, and into view almost immediately came this disc-shaped craft, slightly raised center, and it was shining in the sunlight, and I had excellent depth reference on it because below us were fair weather cumulus clouds. Now, having come so close to us, it would have been trailing a shock wave which we would have felt. But there was no shock wave, and on top of that, when we landed, we didn't report it as an air miss. Now, if it had been an aeroplane, we would have reported it because it was far too close to us. And I've talked to a large number of pilots, some of whom have had very interesting experiences, and in no way will they ever go public. They will not talk about it in public, and they certainly wouldn't commit anything to writing. And it's an unhappy climate, actually, which has persisted since the 50s, and it was initiated by the American military, imposing fines and jail sentences on pilots, where pilots were discouraged, really, on the basis of fear of ridicule and possibility of losing their jobs.
So yet more complexities are added, further blurring the search for evidence. Pilots seem to me one of the most reliable sources on UFO sightings, but before setting out on journeys that took me to France, Germany, and to New York in the worst blizzard in its history, I investigated those scientific schools of thought which maintain that UFOs may not be all they seem, whoever claims to see them. Prominent in this field is Susan Blackmore, a senior lecturer in psychology at the West of England University.
Airline pilots are very interesting because on the whole they have a much better knowledge of objects in the sky than ordinary people. They are much less likely to be tricked, as it were, by things like reflections in glass and so on, which trick many people. However, they have the same kind of minds that we all have, a visual system that will take, a flickering shadow and turn it into a solid object.
What are the actual mechanics in the mind which cause this false idea?
Well, the most important fact is to understand the way memory works. Memory is not like a tape recorder that stores all the information and then you play it back. The brain is constantly changing and is sort of updated, if you like, all the time by everything that happens. Now, when we try to imagine something, we've got to think to ourselves, well, is that just something I fantasized, or was that really a memory? Now, what happens when you tell stories about your own past and you keep on telling the story is that story becomes so fixed in your own mind that it comes to seem to you as vivid and real as any actual memory.
It makes it sound that it's rather difficult sometimes for people to trust their perceptions. Is that a sort of standard psychologist view?
Oh, absolutely. All our perceptions are, if you like, constructions of the mind. We take in all the information through our ears and eyes and so on, and we make the best guess we can about what is actually out there. Almost all UFOs are created by the mind, not by objects out in space. But there remains a little chink in that, a little possibility in my mind that there may be things visiting us. But most UFOs turn out to be either the moon or Venus or other common objects in the sky. And also we underestimate the powers of our own mind to transform things and to make us see what we expect to see rather than what's actually there.
I have been accused of various things. I've been accused by scientists of hallucinating. I've been accused by somebody else of not being sufficiently trained in meteorology to know what I'm talking about. I've also been accused by an astronomer of misperception. The denial is extreme in some cases, and I found that people really don't want to hear in detail what I have to say. I think this is such an important subject. It is potentially one of the most important changes that the human species will have to confront, because it is our future in a way. If somebody else has done this, then inevitably one day we shall do it as well.
Captain Graham Shepherd defending his point of view. Yet, is it also possible that UFO sightings can be explained by changes in the Earth's magnetic field, or the global electromagnetic pollution of our time? Science writer and lecturer Albert Budden elaborates this hypothesis.
I do think there are physical UFOs that can be photographed and seen from different locations and witnessed by different people, but I don't think they're nuts and bolts flying saucers that fly about in the atmosphere. I think there are basically a natural phenomena called earthlights, which are balls of electromagnetic energy that come out of the ground at fault lines, and these light phenomena can have physical effects on the environment. They can burn witnesses, they appear on radar screens, they can be photographed. There's a whole range of electromagnetic light phenomena in the atmosphere that are the real UFOs.
So are you saying that even when somebody seems to see a craft which seems to be metallic and which seems to be very solid in form, that is just light, just energy?
Well, I think if you look at these reports, you find that 95% of them, even quite promising ones of what appears to be watertight cases of craft and lights and ladders and windows, turn out to be misidentifications of mundane objects seen in unusual conditions. Kites, birds, balloons, planes, stars, meteors. There's a very high percentage, and the UFO phenomenon is basically a mixture of different things.
And do you think at the base of it there are no extraterrestrial craft coming from outside this planet?
I think that's a fantasy. But and all of the hundreds of landings and contacts that are supposed to have been, we haven't got as much as an alien paperclip.
Albert Budden. Because most governments remain silent and mainstream science generally ignores untestable phenomena, many self-styled UFO investigators have appeared all over the world. They meet frequently, and I went to 3 such conferences in a few weeks. At the 4th UFO World Congress in Dusseldorf, Professor John Mack, a psychiatrist of the Harvard Medical School and a Pulitzer Prize winner, was the main speaker. He's written a best-selling book about claimed alien abduction. But at Dusseldorf, Professor Mack introduced a filmed report by a young schoolgirl in Zimbabwe, which held his audience spellbound.
Now what happened was this. On September 16th, 1994, after 2 days in which a very bright, unidentified flying object was tracked on radar across the country of Zimbabwe, an extraordinary event occurred on that Friday morning at about 10:15 at the Ariel School. The children were at break. The 11 and 12-year-olds had the responsibility of supervising the 9 and 10-year-olds. The teachers and the headmaster were all in a staff meeting, and none of them observed what happened.
I saw a little object hovering. It was quite big, actually, and then there was little ones all around it. And it looked as if they were changing spaceships.
Changing spaceships? In what does that mean? Who was changing?
The people inside the spaceships were running in different directions.
But the running you saw was inside the ship itself?
No, they were outside.
Oh, you saw them outside?
Yes.
How many of the, what would we call them? What do you call these beings? What do you call them?
Well, everybody calls them aliens.
So you want to call them aliens?
I would have just called them strange beings.
So how many of these strange beings did you see?
I saw one main one, and other people said they saw other ones, but I saw one, and it had big eyes. That's all I saw about it, big eyes.
Where
and
did you see
a black body.
The black body. How far away would you guess you were from this strange being?
Oh, about 3 to 4 meters.
3 to 4 meters, so you were really close then. And what was this strange being doing? Was he moving around, running around? Was he standing looking at you?
No, he was standing staring at me. He was quite scary.
What was scary about him?
His big eyes, I think. His eyes looked at me as if, oh, I want to...
I want you.
Yeah, I want you to come with me. I want you to come.
Did you go with him, do you think?
No, only my eyes went with him.
Your eyes went with him?
And my feeling.
And your feeling went with him. So was there a part of you that wanted to go with him?
Yeah.
That felt like drawn to go with him?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you say what that felt like?
Again, a little scary and a little excited.
Yeah.
And a little I shouldn't go.
That little girl's report from southern Africa was a highlight of the Congress, but there was no shortage of reports from other continents, and a Brazilian science teacher, A.J. Gavert, who's the president of the Brazilian Center for UFO Research, claims that the skies over Latin America in particular are aswarm with activity.
Well, in Brazil and in other countries of South America, we have detected almost every sort of UFO sightings, landings, contacts, and abductions in special areas of Brazil and in Argentina and in Puerto Rico and in Chile and Peru and Colombia. We're talking about people who live and work in farms. We talk about people who have gone to big cities once or twice in their lifetime. They don't have bookshops, they don't have magazines that they can read, they don't have access to television, you know. Most people don't even know that the UFO exists. They don't know that they are supposed to tell it to anyone. And if they know that they are supposed to tell, they don't know to whom they are supposed to tell. I'm someone who has the feet on the ground. I have never seen a UFO in these 20 years I've been investigating. I don't even dreamt about UFO, never. But I gotta tell you, I gotta know everything about these guys. Do they have religions? What do they know about God? What was Jesus Christ? Do they love? Do they make sex? Do they have BBC in their planets or whatever? We gotta know that, you know. I can't sleep when I start thinking about that, you know. And maybe they have solutions or answers to most of our questions.
I found participants in the UFO conferences, and indeed all investigators of this subject, to be generally sincere, rational people. Among them was Larry Warren, who had been an anti-terrorist guard at the twin air bases of RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge in December 1980. He was in nearby Rendlesham Forest with his deputy base commander, Colonel Halt, whose strained voice we heard at the start of this program. I went back to Suffolk with Larry to relive the most traumatic night of his life.
Okay, this is it, Jesus. Over this little rise, I saw a glow of light. And I could hear a lot of radio transmissions. I could see people moving on the hill. Colonel Halt and his people. Out that way is a second farmer's field. This would be his second. He was about 1.25 miles over that way now, having other objects sighted. And this is a spot sitting right on this side with my boss, was an airman who had obviously seen something so disturbing that he was sitting like this with his hands around his head. And he was sitting here crying. And my boss was trying to calm him down. We went past that. And I knew we weren't fighting a fire or having a training exercise. There was something wrong. Right here in front of me was a circular mist. It was a greenish orange, but translucent at times. You could see the ground through it. I stood here and I was looking at this in shock, basically. What the hell is this? What are we seeing? As I stood out here, my movement was half speed. I had a Timex watch, much like this, but silver. And I went to look at it for some reason, and movement was very slow. The sky was different and wrong. Movement was slow, and perceptions were altered. Where everything changed is that from that distant stand of trees, straight out, was a red light. And this red light started probably where you can see the clouds now, at that height, and it made a straight line toward us. The light exploded. These shards of light or whatever were so bright that I suffered flash burns to the retinas of my eyes. Other personnel did too. In that instant, we had a solid, structured craft of undetermined origin. Very large, probably 30 feet at its base. It had three sharp appendages, mother of pearl, rainbow effect on it. If you looked dead at it, it would distort. You had to see it with your peripheral vision to get the full impact. And it sat right here. I mean, we're right where this thing is, and it seems so comical now to look back like it's some, just story from the movies, but it isn't.
At that point, Larry had been one of about 80 American troops surrounding the glowing object. Military photographers and cameramen were recording the scene. As he shared memories of this climactic moment with me, Larry's face showed new signs of tension.
We're at very close to the object. Our shadows seemed to be cast onto it, and yet we had no lighting equipment to do such things. It was impossible in hindsight. There were three type of living beings of some sort, and they weren't your traditional thing that's in pop culture now with the gray skin and all. This is almost translucent things, but there was a face, and there were big eyes it had, and you could see a sense of clothing, but then again, was it not? I don't know. But there were three individual things above the ground in this light. I saw the center one adjust its head at one point, so I knew these were I assumed they were living things, not projections, not tricks of any kind. Because our commander is about a very tall guy, and this thing almost seemed to adjust its head to look at his face. And that was all filmed. Every bit of it was. I wish I had known everything I'd end up going through. I would have grabbed some of the footage and run home that night. But yeah, I wish I had.
Larry Warren is now co-authoring a book about his experience and how it's affected his life, because he passionately wants the world to know what happened to him and others involved. Larry's view that the events at Rendlesham have been deliberately covered up by the American and British governments is more dispassionately confirmed by Jenny Randalls.
There are certain things we can say with assurance about the Rendlesham Forest case. For example, we can say that an event happened. We can say that the British and American governments have lied to the public about it, because clearly they knew more about it than they've ever let on. They clearly know that an event of great magnitude occurred, which bamboozled senior military personnel who are trained to deal with situations like this and were thrown totally out of their depth by it. Now, they would not have a clue when that experience first happened, whether they were dealing with alien visitors, some kind of strange natural energy, a terrorist attack or whatever. clearly, as a consequence of that, they had to take the cautious approach and investigate the matter most thoroughly. And mountains of paperwork must have been produced as a result of that. Yet, officially, according to both the British and American governments, there was no investigation at all. There are no records anywhere appertaining to this case. And basically, nobody took it seriously at all. If that were true, I'd actually be more worried about the defense of this country than if they actually investigated it and decided that the public didn't have a right to know whatever it was that they had discovered.
On checking, I recalled that December 1980 was one of the danger points of the Cold War. Soviet troops had massed on the Polish border because the trade union movement Solidarity was threatening communist rule. The United States and NATO had just warned Moscow not to invade, and the air bases were on alert in Suffolk. Other witnesses saw UFOs directing beams onto the nuclear weapons bunkers. So, outlandish though the question seemed, I asked the best-selling British UFO author Timothy Good whether he thought the nuclear weapons could have been interfered with.
It is quite possible. This is not unprecedented. There have been many cases worldwide where UFOs, and these are officially documented cases, so I'm not talking out of the top of my head. People study my books, they can see these reports by various intelligence agencies and security police and so forth. There have been cases in Canada, in the States, in Russia, many other countries where UFOs have hovered over nuclear weapon missile delivery systems and have paralyzed those rockets or the weapon systems.
Of this incident in Rendlesham Forest in 1980, the Ministry of Defence in Britain said, I believe, there was no threat to national security.
Precisely. That's what Lord Hill Norton has said on numerous occasions. A former Chief of Defence Staff and Chairman of the NATO Military Committee, he's convinced that it was a threat to our national security, a very serious one.
Something landed at Rendlesham. There's no question about that. Either the Deputy Commander of the US Air Force Base, Colonel Halt, and his merry men were hallucinating, in which case that must be of defense interest to Her Majesty's government, because it was a nuclear-capable Air Force base. Or, if they were not hallucinating but telling the truth, then, without any doubt, something happened which was of keen defense interest, and it is absurd of Ministry of Defense spokesman to say otherwise.
After hearing those views from Admiral Lord Hill Norton, who was Chief of the Defence Staff from 1971 to 1973, I asked the Ministry of Defence in London if it still believed there had been no threat to national security at Rendlesham Forest. An official spokesman told me, "We have no evidence of a threat to our security from outer space." Investigators have obtained hundreds of documents about UFOs in America and Britain under the US Freedom of Information Act. But while confirming many sightings, they don't provide all the answers. Dr. Rowney Kilder, a former Chief Medical Officer of Health for Lapland, is now an international UFO researcher, and she claims to have knowledge of other secret documents not yet released.
One of them, interestingly, is the NATO report of 1961 to 1964. It was so secret that at time only 15 copies were made for the whole world. And it was made because NATO mistook the 50 UFOs flying in formation from east to west, from Russia over Europe, and we almost started a Third World War. In that NATO report, it states the reasons why people are not allowed to get the information. Number one is theology. All the dogma of world's religions will collapse. Number two, human ego will collapse. We think we're the greatest in the universe. We are like Stone Age people in technology, in morals, in ethics, in comparison to other cosmic civilizations. Number three was our economy. We pay for gas, oil, and electricity. They use free energy from the air, zero-point energy, so to say. So that is a great economical question. And number four was the laws of physics. The speed of light for them is peanuts, and therefore our university teachings have to be changed.
But we can depend that you have seen this report yourself?
I have not seen the report, but I have heard of it, and I know the person who has seen it. He is an American military who was working at that time in the 60s in SHAPE headquarters, and he mentioned that he has gotten permission from the highest possible level to give out this information.
So are you saying that NATO is slipping this information out to ufologists gradually?
Yes, in my mind, this is exactly what is the case.
Former nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, who has been investigating the subject professionally for almost 37 years, supports Dr. Kilder's views about the significance of the cover-up, but doesn't believe it's starting to crumble yet.
The subject of flying saucers represents a kind of cosmic Watergate, meaning that some few people within the governments of the United States, Britain, Canada, and undoubtedly many other countries have known since July 1947, when 2 crashed saucers and several alien bodies were recovered in Roswell, New Mexico, that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft. What do I think the government knows? I think it certainly knows that we've learned a lot technologically, that aliens are coming here, that they're abducting people, that they are monitoring, if you will, our military installations. None of the arguments by a very small group of very noisy negativists, as I call them, stand up under careful scrutiny. Their arguments sound great until you look at the evidence and then they collapse. We're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. Visits to planet Earth by alien spacecraft, successful cover-up of the best data, obviously the bodies and the wreckage, for 48 years.
What do you think is behind the biggest story of the millennium? Where is it going to lead, do you think?
Well, I think the cards are in the hands of the aliens, if you will. Obviously, they're not here to land in Trafalgar Square or to get on television programs or even BBC radio programs. They're here for their purposes. So we probably don't have much control over what happens, except whether or not the governments of the country or countries of the world are forced to put some of the data out on the table. And it's clear from the documents we do have that agencies such as the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, have been withholding just loads of UFO data. So the question then becomes, will the government finally come clean? That'll only happen, I think, if the media would make the same effort blowing the lid off the cosmic Watergate as the Washington Post did off the political Watergate. It takes work, it takes effort. Anybody who says there isn't a cover-up hasn't done his homework.
Momentous claims from Stanton Friedman, and it's perhaps the enormity of such issues that cause the vast majority of journalists to sit uneasily on the fence over the whole subject of UFOs, or to report it tongue-in-cheek to protect themselves from public ridicule. Yet between 5 and 10% of all UFO sightings remain persistently unexplained, and there's no shortage of informed people who believe that alien spacecraft are neither fantasy nor fiction, but a fact. Among the most emphatic is Admiral Lord Hill Norton.
What I would say is that there is now overwhelming evidence that there are physical objects flying about in our atmosphere which are not made in this world. It behoves governments to find out what they are and come clean about how to deal with whoever is directing them.